Tales of an Unlikely Brotherhood by mentallypapaya, Chapter 4. They're dating, and you know this how? They're sleeping together! They didn't get the chance to interrogate either of the two, mostly because asking Katsuki if he was in a romantic relationship with anyone when he didn't explicitly offer up the information himself seemed like a great way to ask for a painful but swift death. Izuku, on the other hand, had a different issue. He wasn't the type to get violent after a personal question. No, there was something about his innocent, earnest face that looked at his classmates with such polite cheerfulness. Nobody could quite bring themselves to look directly at those baby greens and mercilessly ask such a personal question as, "So, are you dating Bakugou? You know, the guy who beats the shit out of you during 90% of our heroics classes." It was inhumane. The class was still fighting over who had to actually ask, so finding definite answers was on the pause for the time being. They mostly just watched the two interact, warily, as if studying two violent animals and waiting for an attack to happen. Except an attack would be seen as normal. They were really looking for signs of romantic affection. But for the next few weeks nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Katsuki mostly ignored Izuku, apart from throwing insults across the classroom and hurling explosions in his face during training. And they settled down into what looked like a relatively peaceful era of Class 1A. Well, peaceful might be a stretch, but it was normal, at least. The latest piece of information to make the rounds within the class was Aizawa's announcement that they would be taking a little overnight training session soon, designed to help them learn self-sufficiency during emergencies where outside help wouldn't be available. Missions interrupted by weather or natural disasters that could leave them stranded. Aizawa said all pros had to have up-to-par outdoor survival skills. The class said this and immediately cheered, "Class camping trip!" So it was clear they were taking it seriously. Aizawa just sighed and told them not to eat any wild mushrooms. "Good to know you have faith in us, sensei." Kirishima grinned, giving a thumbs up. Aizawa left the room without a word. The class was given 3 copies of a map. The most basic survival tools they'd ever seen were dropped off in a forest with instructions to split up and make their ways to the 3 camps marked down for them. The only confirmation they had that there wasn't going to be some secret battle they would have to fight was the fact that they had been told not to bother with their hero uniforms, instead embarking on their little hike in their usual school jackets and ties. It was eerily familiar to the training camp. Something the class shared with each other through worried glances and a careful understanding did not say such a comparison to Katsuki. "If the League of Villains shows up this time, I'm fucking suing you, eh?" Or, never mind, Katsuki brought it up himself. "Come on, Baku bro, this time will be fun. We won't even have teachers waiting for us at the camps to force us to train all day. We can just enjoy the scenery." Kirishima attempted to throw an arm around Katsuki's shoulders and was immediately shoved off. Katsuki snatched up one of the maps out of Ashido's hand and scanned the locations of the camps. "Alright, let's get this shit over with. We're splitting up into 3 teams, 2 groups of 7 and 1 of 6. Shitty-haired, dunce-face, round-face, ponytail, icy hot Deku, you're with me, and I don't give a fuck what the rest of you extras do." And with that, Katsuki stormed off into the forest, not once looking back. The class looked at each other, unsure of how to proceed, until Izuku picked up one of the sleeping bag rolls and started skipping along after him. "Okay, Kacchan." "Well, good luck," Asui offered with a shrug. Uraraka sighed, and the chosen group began collecting their share of the camping gear. "Yeah, thanks. See you guys later." Kaminari waved back as they started to trudge after the duo. As they left, Kirishima leant onto Kaminari to whisper, "So, how do you think this is going to go?" he asked. Kaminari considered his answer carefully. "Either it's the worst night of our lives or the most entertaining. No in between." Kirishima nodded in agreement. "Glad we're both on the same page." The camp was very disappointing. There was a small clearing within the depths of the forest with a small stream nearby and a few logs around the charred remains of what looked to be a campfire. "This is..." Uraraka tried to search for the right words. Are we sure this is where we're supposed to stop? Katsuki humphed. You want to be the fucking navigator? This is the damn camp. Uraraka held her hands up in defense, and Momo winced. Well, Aizawa-sensei did say it was going to be survival training, not camping. It's not like there was going to be a hotel waiting for us. Still, I was hoping for like a packet of marshmallows or something. Kirishima mumbled, and Kaminari snickered at him as the group began to spread out a bit, getting to know the area. All we have are the sleeping bags, cooking supplies, and some basic food rations. It's lucky we're only here for one night. Otherwise we could be in trouble. Izuku said, rummaging through the kitchen duffel Aizawa had dumped on them before he'd sped off to leave them to their fate. Do you think the other groups have the same stuff as us? No, Katsuki drew out sarcastically. He's given us this, and then the other guys get Taco fucking Bell. Izuku's head snapped over to narrow his eyes indignantly at the blonde's back, while Kirishima's knees bent slightly as he grabbed onto Kaminari's arm, head ducking down while he snickered at the verbal barbs. We just got here. Could you not immediately start fighting with each other? Todoroki asked, and Momo nodded in agreement. He's right, she said, even as Katsuki gave her a disgusted look at the concept, and Izuku continued to stare at him slyly out of the corner of his eyes. Let's get everybody's sleeping bags set up and start making food. It wasn't particularly hard to set up their camp. Their objective was only to stay alive, not to complete any other tasks, or have anybody attempt to stop them, so it wasn't exactly a challenge, especially with Katsuki on their team, of whom was a camping expert, as it turned out. It did end up feeling a little like a camping trip, with the way Todoroki and Uraraka had laid their sleeping bags in a wide circle close to the fire, and the way Kirishima, Izuku, and Kaminari had played Marco Polo in the stream, while Katsuki and Momo took over the cooking. Read, Katsuki cooked while Momo huffed and got her hand slapped away the second she attempted to get involved in any way. Somehow, against all odds, they managed to keep a small amount of peace during the afternoon. Something that no doubt nobody would believe when they got back to UA the next day. Sure, there were some close calls when Izuku attempted to highly praise the meal Katsuki had prepared, and Katsuki threatened to shove the plate down his shirt. Out of gratitude, surely. But Kirishima was luckily able to de-escalate that particular boogering battle. The weirdest thing that happened was after Izuku had gotten out of the river, leaving Kirishima and Kaminari to wrestle in the water while they dried off with his shirt. Kirishima had Kaminari trapped in a headlock until they'd heard Izuku's high-pitched, terror-filled shrieks fill the air. Kacchan! Kacchan! Immediately alert and worried, Kirishima dropped his victim in the water, and they both looked up to the bank to see Izuku rushing towards the campfire, pure fear on his face as he scrambled up the grass. What? What? Jesus Christ, what? Katsuki rushed out, standing up from where he'd been stirring a pan and taking a few steps towards the boy while still brandishing a metal spatula. Todoroki, Uraraka, and Momo all looked startled, searching the areas as if a villain was going to appear from somewhere and attack them. What's wrong? Izuku ran over to Katsuki, breathing hard for a moment before spinning to hide behind him, gripping the back of his jacket and attempting to duck under the fabric, almost shoving Katsuki off his feet in the process. The fuck? Katsuki struggled to maintain his balance and ripped his jacket out of Izuku's grip, turning to face him again. This did not deter Izuku, who instead just lifted up one side of the front of Katsuki's jacket instead. Katsuki threw his hands up incredulously, giving up and letting the smaller boy perch under the fabric of his uniform like an umbrella. Kirishima and Kaminari clung to each other, still up to their waists in water, staring with nothing but fascination. You safe now? He snapped, pointedly, raising an eyebrow. Izuku sniffed. There was a wasp. Katsuki scoffed. The others were just amazed that he was still allowing the physical contact Izuku was initiating. Todoroki cocked his head. I don't see a wasp. Izuku huffed, abruptly wrenching the jacket off of himself and narrowing his heated eyes at Todoroki. Well, there isn't now, but there was. Izuku cut himself off with wide eyes as a faint but audibly buzzing noise was heard by those near the campfire, and he shrieked before shoving himself back under the cover of Katsuki's jacket. Said umbrella replacement sighed in defeat and forced himself to not stumble under the shifting weight. "Just stay still," Katsuki drawled, unimpressed. "It's not gonna fucking hurt you." Izuku made an untrusting noise from where he was slouched, eyes shut tight. Just tell me when it's gone." Katsuki rolled his eyes, still and unbothered by the wasp still flapping around relatively near his head. Uraraka was staring at the pair with a triumphant look in her eyes, and her gaze panned until it landed on the other duo in the water, who she grinned at. "In love," she mouthed. Kirishima rolled his eyes. "Ask then," he mouthed back mockingly. "Bitch." Kaminari snorted, and promptly lost his footing, toppling over and under the water with a splash. "It's gone now, dick nerd," Katsuki said, shoving his limpet away from him. Momo snorted as the blonde made his way back to his food, taking over from her and continuing to stir. "Dick nerd, that's a new one," she commented. Izuku winced, scratching the back of his head as he made to sit down on one of the other logs. It's really not," he admitted. "You guys just haven't always been around." "Are you really that afraid of wasps?" Todoroki asked, innocently, and Izuku blushed. "The buzzing sound just makes me paranoid." Uraraka looked like she was about to say something, when Katsuki interrupted them by turning down to the river, taking his pan off the fire. "You two better get your dipshit asses out of the fucking water. I ain't waiting on you to serve this shit up," he hollered, beginning to divide the food while Kirishima and Kaminari scrambled to make it out of the river, sabotaging each other as they fought for first place in their little race to the camp. After that, things were calm for the rest of the evening. It was Momo who suggested that they get an early night, considering Aizawa had warned them of an early pickup from the training site the next morning, and point deductions for the groups that weren't first to show up. So they decided to go to bed early. It was kind of fun, Kirishima thought, to have a mini camping trip with their little group. Kaminari was convinced that Aizawa had set up the assignment simply to get a break from them all, but Kirishima wasn't complaining. It reminded him of when he was a kid and his family would go camping overnight on the local beach. No tents, just under the stars, as they enjoyed each other's company. They all settled down by the sleeping bags fairly quickly, going off into small groups to freshen up by the stream before bedding down for the night. Kirishima couldn't help but notice when Izuku and Todoroki came back together, and that Izuku seemed a bit put off by the fact that the only non-occupied bags were the ones furthest from Katsuki, Kaminari and Kirishima having snatched the ones on either side of him in their little circle. But he didn't say anything, just frowning slightly and hesitating before settling down on his own sleeping bag. Surprisingly, despite the early night and lack of proper lighting, the hike through the woods had taken a lot out of the group, and Kirishima had found it easy for his eyelids to grow heavy, and the quiet yet peaceful atmosphere and the burning embers of their fire gave a slow warmth emitting from the flames, and gently rocking the group into a peaceful sleep. And then Kirishima was jolted awake, in the middle of the night. Now, his first thought was, "Fuck's sake, Aizawa-sensei, I knew you'd spring something on us when we were least expecting it," before realizing that there was no actual sign of any attack. Confused, he continued to stare up at the clear, starry night sky, before finally pinning down the noise that must be the culprit towards his sudden awakening. Somebody was tossing and turning in their sleeping bag, and they wouldn't fucking stop. Slowly, Kirishima turned around in his own sleeping bag, blinking as his sleepy eyes slowly got used to the light coming from the barely burning embers on the campfire, only to then force them to dim down and focus on the darkness behind the fire instead. Once he'd gotten used to the low light, he was able to identify Izuku's sleeping bag to be the one making the noise, with the boy tossing and turning uncomfortably within the fabric. Kirishima watched in confusion as Izuku finally snapped up into a sitting position, huffing and looking around their group with narrowed eyes. Izuku didn't seem to notice that Kirishima was awake. And so the redhead got the perfect view as he slowly stood up, abandoning his sleeping bag and picking his way over to where Katsuki was fast asleep nearby. Baffled, Kirishima watched as Izuku poked Katsuki's sleeping form with his toe, before ducking down next to him. The darkness masked most of the details of what was going on, but Kirishima heard a lot of shuffling and sleeping bag rustles, and Katsuki groaning slightly in his sleep as Izuku's shadow seemed to merge with Katsuki's. Kirishima was not sure what the fuck he'd just witnessed, or how to deal with it. Uraraka's theories about the two secretly dating flashed through his mind, leading to some horrible ideas as to what Izuku was doing. But for his own sanity, he banished them from his mind and determinedly clenched his eyes shut. Absolutely not. He was not having those kinds of thoughts going around in his mind. Ever. Thankfully, Kirishima had fallen asleep quite quickly, and when he woke up in the morning, he wasn't even completely sure it hadn't been a dream. He watched the still, slightly dark sky of early morning in contentment. Sitting up and being greeted with Uraraka and Kaminari's jaw-dropping stares towards Katsuki's sleeping bag quickly vanquished those hopes. "Oh my god, this is incredible," Kaminari whispered, Uraraka doing the same in agreement with shining eyes. "You can't argue with this. This is definitely proof they have to be dating." Kaminari didn't take his eyes off Katsuki's sleeping bag as Todoroki slowly woke up and glanced, confused at Izuku's empty bag, before noticing what the other three were staring at and abruptly freezing. "It's not proof unless you ask and they confirm it," Kirishima whispered back as Momo finally joined them in the land of the living, leaving the iconic duo to be the only sleeping ones left. "Fuck off, this is love shit," Uraraka claimed quietly. Admittedly, it was quite damning. Looking back, Kirishima could now accurately assign the noises Izuku had been making during the night to the action of unzipping Katsuki's sleeping bag and somehow crawling inside next to him. The two were still asleep, borderline cuddling with Izuku's nose pressed into the crook of Katsuki's armpit as he snuggled into the blonde's side. Kirishima came to the quick realization that as Katsuki had not woken up during the night, he had absolutely no idea what he was about to wake up to. That Izuku Midoriya was cuddling into him. "Dude," he breathed, eyes wide. "When Bakugou wakes up, Mido's dead." "Unless they're boyfriends," Uraraka reminded them, to which Kirishima rolled his eyes. "There could be a death either way," Momo pointed out. "When he finds out, we've just been watching them for the past few minutes." "She's right," Kirishima startled slightly at the realization. "Maybe we should—" But it was too late, because there was an immediate shifting noise from the double-packed sleeping bag that immediately stole all of their attention. Not that they had ever really lost it. Katsuki's eyes slowly shuddered slightly. As he came to awareness, eyes still closed, he adjusted his position slightly, before abruptly freezing in place. The rest of them had held their breaths, knowing they should probably run, but unable to move as the blonde was obviously noticing for the first time that there was someone in his sleeping bag with him. And then Katsuki abruptly brought up an arm, swinging it over to lightly rest on Midoriya's sleeping face. His eyes were still shut as he looked to be feeling around, patting the green-headed boy's cheek, and feeling the shape of his nose before apparently recognizing Izuku's head from touch alone, and he relaxed. "Clingy nerd," he mumbled to himself quietly, low enough that the rest of the group could barely hear. Then Katsuki finally opened his eyes, completely missing the 5 students staring at him with open mouths and instead looking down at the Izuku that was still tucked into his side, arms having come up to fist handfuls of the blonde shirt and looking remarkably peaceful. Katsuki began to lightly tap Izuku's cheek, a small, Kirishima swore, fond smile on his face, as Izuku finally began to stir, his eyebrows furrowing at the less violent than expected awakening. "Come on, up now," Katsuki mumbled, still in that soft yet quietly gruff morning voice that Kirishima would be laughing at Uraraka later for blushing at. Izuku sighed into Katsuki's shirt, somehow sounding disappointed without saying anything. "Morning, dick nerd," Katsuki said, finally running out of patience and giving Izuku a slightly harder push, moving his torso out of the way so Izuku's head would fall on the ground. Izuku grumbled, finally opening his eyes and pushing himself up until he was leaning on his elbows. Again, somehow, he didn't notice any of the others, head instead turning away from them to look at Katsuki. "What time is it?" "Fuck if I know. Early." Katsuki shrugged, apparently content with not getting up for now, and looking up at Izuku. He nudged Izuku in the side with his knee. "What was it? Nightmares or general Deku clinginess?" Izuku rolled his eyes. "Not nightmares, just got a little cold. Every other time I've gone camping we've shared a tent or been right next to each other. It felt weird." Katsuki snorted slightly, and Kirishima suddenly felt bad, like they were watching an intimately private moment between two people that were obviously way closer than they all ever realized. He turned to convey this in a look to Kaminari, receiving an understanding nod. They didn't get a chance to do anything about it, however, because Izuku finally stood up and stretched his arms, looking around the camp area and noticing the 5 people still watching them. He paused. Katsuki followed Izuku's eyes and saw them also, giving no room to pretend that they hadn't just been staring at the two for the past 5 minutes. "Oh, morning guys! Didn't realize you were awake." Izuku let his arms drop, his usual cheerful attitude coming through without preamble. "Morning!" Kirishima rushed out, feeling oddly like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. We Katsuki snorted. "We're just being weird as shit," he suggested, slightly taken aback by the casual and non-angry attitude towards them. Kirishima didn't answer in time, and Katsuki steamrolled forward to get up, cracking his neck. "Alright, we don't have time for this bullshit. If we want to be the first group back, we're leaving soon. We need to clean up the camp." "What, Kaminari turned to give Kirishima an incredulous look as Katsuki started to walk off. "He doesn't care?" Kirishima didn't know what to do. He shrugged. "I have no fucking clue. All I know is that we have one hell of a story to tell the others when we get back to UA. Let's see Tsuyu deny them dating after this," Uraraka muttered quietly once Izuku left hearing range, a righteous glint in her eye. "Whatever's going on between them, I can't believe it took us this long to notice," Kirishima said, getting up out of his sleeping bag and going through the motions of neatly rolling it up. "Maybe they've been replaced by clones, and the real Bakugou and Midoriya still don't like each other," Todoroki offered. Momo gave him a look. "You really need to stop watching conspiracy theory videos on YouTube." Can someone give me more Bakugou fic recs? Where it's kind of short but long, longer than a one-shot but still relatively short like this, where it's kind of just them and their bullshit crack fic, and the rest of UA having to deal with it. Also, fun fact, did you know that whenever Bakugou cracked his neck, kind of towards the end of there, I cracked my neck because I forgot that it reset so I could do it, and, you do that whenever you crack your knuckles or bones or whatever. So, I think it made it into the audio. So that's fun. That's neck crack reveal.